everybody, and welcome to another episode of Office Hours. This is Office Hours episode number 68. Dave, you just missed the lewd episode by one. You got in right in time.
Yep,
You did
that's
it.
good.
Nice work. So, as you can see, I'm joined by a very fancy human. This is my friend Dave. You definitely recognize this Dave. He's very human. Dave is someone who has been playing role-playing games with me for several years now. Longtime mod of the channel, and is a designer himself. We've been playing for at least 2 years, right?
Yeah, it just totally threw me that that's a true
That's
statement.
a true statement. Yeah, right? So Dave has been around in shadow form or in realness since Dave 1. And we've played multiple versions of Dungeons and Dragons together. We've played many role-playing games. And Dave asked me recently if I had some thoughts about GMing Dungeons and Dragons. Because Dave is going to be doing such a thing. That's the case, right? Dave, tell me, set it up for me. So, why are you here? What can I do for you today, Dave?
Yeah, so I've done bits and bobs of GMing 5e before, but this can be both my first foray into playing in person properly,
Mm-hmm.
first foray into running pre-made like adventure stuff because I'm going to be doing Adventurers League
Mm-hmm.
and also running it for strangers. So
Yeah. So we got a
stuff.
collection of things. I also want to ask you a few things about playing D&D and interacting with a GM, because I think that, so Dave, I've seen you do this in chat. We've talked about this before. There have been several questions on Office Hours where someone will ask something and I will start responding by saying like, well, one of my players is like this. And I've seen you be like, oh no, he's talking about me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Dave and I, we're gonna focus mainly on fifth edition, but who knows what kinds of Dungeons and Dragons tangents we might wander off to. I wanted to start by talking about the way that you and I interact on the shows and in the games that we play, because I think that you play Dungeons and Dragons like I play Dungeons and Dragons, in
Yeah.
that we play to win.
hmm
So, I mean, that's going to be an interesting thing, I think, for you, because the inverse of that, running the game as the dungeon master, your job is to lose interestingly.
Yeah. I've had like kind of mixed success based on who's been playing with me before when I've done GMing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Much better after I learned the kind of good etiquette of talking about those expectations beforehand, but making sure to set up situations for the players where they are able to overcome things that they've already indicated they're invested in feels better for me, because then it doesn't feel like losing as much, because I still feel like I'm winning because I'm making them have fun.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a thing that a lot of role-playing games have tried to kind of get at. Like, there's this layer in RPGs where we say no one can win or lose in Dungeons and Dragons. The point is to have a fun time, but then there are rules where you can explicitly lose. You can definitely lose D&D. So I have to believe that the inverse of that, whatever the opposite, the most opposite of losing, has to be winning, right? Like,
Yeah.
what do you feel when you play a role playing game? Like, let's say Dungeons and Dragons. When you play a role playing game, what makes you feel like you had a good session? Like when you come out of it and you're like, yeah, that was fun. What parts appeal to you?
It's an interesting question. I enjoy if I feel like the GM, whoever they are, has taken the time to make something or interact with me, and more specifically my character, in a personal way.
Mm-hmm.
So if they've taken time to, hey, I've dropped in this name, that's like written on your sheet somewhere, or we did something a while ago and you really enjoyed that, or maybe here's an encounter where I think you'll shine if you recognize what it is that I'm doing and can play to overcome that and be the one to overcome that specifically.
Right. So it's about feeling like you are mechanically or narratively making an impact on what is going on in the game. Not just that you're changing things, but that you are able to participate in some customized way.
Yeah, I think so, and I think D&D lets you do that fairly easily. Um, Not so much in terms of the format or going into people's backstories, especially with the pre-written stuff,
Mm-hmm. Well,
but
it's interesting because
carving out nations
it's interesting
easy.
because it sounds like it's on what the things that you are interested in as a player are almost the antithesis of the kind of play you get out of an Adventurers League game. Because often with those types of games, so for folks who are not familiar, the Adventurers League is Wizards of the Coast's organized play structure. They tend to be treated a bit like TV series in that each adventure is an episode. You're sort of meant to play them in one session, though I've never had that experience with Adventurers League content. I've
Mm.
never seen one that we were able to finish without a little bit of kind of manipulation. So they're meant to be played episodically, and you can drop in, drop out. You come to the game store, whatever, you play a game, and then you take your character away and you come back, and they have fairly strict rules around awarding experience and building characters so that they can port your character from place to place. So in a lot of ways, it's sort of like the speed dating of playing D&D, in that you may never interact with that same group again. That's interesting. So do you think that do you have any experience as a player in that space? Because I think a lot of people take their DM understanding from what they've done as a player. Have you played Adventures League stuff before besides the game that we played?
No, apart from kind of the loose version that we did
Mm-hmm.
for Tyranny of Dragons, I've not played any Adventurers League stuff. I was When I was speaking originally to the local game store, the fact that I would be happy to GM was most definitely a footnote in the message. However, as you can imagine, they were like, okay, this person's offering to do this in a tiny way. So
Right. Yeah.
I'm
So
happy to do either, but
you feel like you were getting into it just because there's a need to have GMs in that space.
um yeah, I mean I wouldn't have offered if I wasn't prepared to do it.
Right.
And I was planning eventually to get into it anyway as kind of a stepping stone to being more confident with my own homebrew stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes
Uh,
sense.
yeah, my weakest part of GMing, or what I feel like has always been the weakest part of me GMing, is prepping in a meaningful way and getting past the feeling of not having either done enough or whatever. So I thought Adventurers League, where
Right.
they kind of have everything for you, might be a nice step to getting a little bit better at that.
Yeah, the stakes of that kind of play tend to be very low because, like with speed dating, if you have a conversation with someone and didn't go well, you don't ever have to speak to them again. You may see them at
Sure.
events again, but you probably both know, like, it wasn't a good fit. Maybe we won't play together necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about pre-gen stuff. Let's talk about pre-gen adventures, because I think that they can be a lot of different things. They can be very freeing, but they can also be kind of a straitjacket depending on how you approach them. Um,
Right.
so you've had some experience doing like create your own adventure stuff, right? Like
Mhm.
you've built your own content in that regard. So what are you thinking is going to be different? What are you concerned about, or what are your feelings about going into sort of a pre-gen situation as opposed to what you've done before?
Sure. So one of my main concerns reading through, because I've purchased the first adventure I intend to run, given a bit of a read, is there are very specific things that are not always highlighted to be the most important parts of any like section of box text or explanation that are integral to the experience of like whatever the room is. Um, like forgetting to mention that the ceiling's higher or lower because of a trap or something like that
Mm,
might be
mm-hmm.
something that I miss in my initial description. because I don't want to read verbatim like the description of the rooms. That way, you're not really injecting very much of your own personality into it.
Right. Yeah, and I think so that's a good point, right? Like, so a pre-generated adventure module will give you a premise. It'll give you a reason for the adventure to happen. It will, and it'll often be a presupposed thing. It'll say like, you are here because of this. This is happening. So you can skip all of
Yes.
the like, you meet in a tavern and you argue about what to do and whether you want to go on the adventure or not. They jump right into the action and say, here's the adventure. They'll give you maps that you need, though not always all the maps that you realize you're going to need when you actually get into it. Sometimes you get maps of things you don't ever use. The adventures are prepped in a way that they hope that you will follow them, but you may find that you need to still do stuff on the fly. They'll give you stat blocks. They'll give you a general kind of path through it, and they'll give you boxes of text that you can read to your players to express to them kind of what's going on. And I'll tell you this, from my experience running, like I like pre-gen adventures. If they're written well, I think that they let you skip doing a lot of the prep stuff if you don't have time to do that or you don't feel like it. They let you skip a lot of the like trying to balance encounters because you can just be like, all right, well, they ostensibly play tested this, so we can just kind of like jump into it. And I think that if they're well written, they allow you to do some bending and adjusting to fit the party and your personal preferences.
Yeah.
But I don't think like you can read the adventure 1,000 times. You can read every single room over and over and over. You can understand all the mechanisms. But when the adventure hits the table, it will go sideways. Like there will be in small ways, not in the way that an adventure can go if it's not a single session like pre-gen. Like sometimes you can have people who just ignore all of your content and wander off somewhere else. But in Adventurers League or in any published adventure, you're going to find that you'll describe something and like you said, you might miss something or the players might not pick up on the implied italics in the box text.
Yes.
And then it's your job to adjust for that, I think. But knowing that you expect it is huge. That's very important.
Yeah.
So I think prep is significant, right? Like obviously read the thing. But I'll tell you this, like about Tomb, there have been traps, there have been encounters that I have misread or I've like described it in a way that didn't get across that stuff. And I tend to change the encounter on the fly rather than like try to backtrack. But you can always backtrack. You can always say like, bring it up again if they miss something, or you can find other ways to reintroduce that detail.
Yeah. I'm not super worried about it eventually. It's just I suppose I don't have any basis for it, but it feels to me with the fact that it's organized play and it's like a pre-written adventure, and the fact that I've not really been part of it before, there might be kind of a method of play which is very different to the one we use. I'm certain that this exists, but to what extent it might be hostile to the ways I'm used to playing is something I'm a little bit concerned about. But yeah, like I say, there's no grounding for,
well, I mean,
just
if we were required to justify our nervousness or anxiety about things, then I feel like no one would feel anxious about shit anymore ever. Because I think a lot of this is just, and I think this is fairly common advice for GMs across the board, whether you're experienced or brand new, playing adventures or making your own stuff. That feeling of like, what if I screw it up? It won't ever go away. That doesn't go away. But you get to a point where you don't care and you get to change the framework of what screwing it up means, right? Like I'm at the point now with adventures where I'm pretty confident that if I misdescribe something, I can think ahead a little ways and I can adjust the adventure so that it wasn't a screw up. I never screwed up at all. It was supposed to be like this. And that idea of, I think it's like being a chef, right? Like if you're partway through a recipe and you realize that you're missing an ingredient, practice and time and familiarity with the core principles of the game will allow you to say, Oh crap, these should have been ghouls, not ghasts. Okay, what can I do to adjust this encounter so it doesn't steamroll them, but it's still challenging about as much as they expected without having to go back and be like, actually, but let's not go too far away from the idea that saying like, oh, hold on, you know what? I meant ghoul when I said ghast. Sorry, like that. Let's just go from here. I'm gonna change them and we'll go from here, right?
Yep. My
Um,
my biggest one of those, as soon as you said that, is I always describe things as large if they're huge
you're
or
right.
just big or like
Yeah, what
whatever.
what
Proper
size is this crab? Is it a huge
It's a
crab?
huge joke.
Is it a giant crab? Well, and that's tricky too, right? And you and I have had some interesting stuff where you want as a GM, and this is the adherence to this idea of immersion. As a GM, you don't want to have to say the name of your move. You don't want to be like, you hit him with a fireball. He is resistant to the damage. Moving on. But also the inverse is that the players will listen to everything that you say looking for mechanical flags, right?
Right.
Like you see a large crab. How large? Like capital L large, lowercase l large? Well, how is it big? Huge. Giant? Put them on the map. Let's go.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think is tricky too. And like how much do the players know versus how much the characters know? What do you do if your player has fought these monsters before? How do we do this?
Yeah. And the tricky thing is, what I would love to be able to do is sit down the group and say, okay, these are my expectations for how much you can play off of your prior knowledge. But the fact that it's going to be not necessarily rotating, but I can't rely on it being the same people who've heard that from me every time. And whether I set up like table rules or table etiquette for my table at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so this gets into the playing with strangers bit, and I think
Right.
this is true not just of Adventurers League, but of any sort of con game or one shot or anything like this where you're GMing for strangers. I don't think there's anything wrong with coming to the table with a little bit of personal box text to be like,
Mhm.
"Hi, I'm Dave. This is the way that I usually GM. These are some things that I will do at the table and some things that I hope that you will do." This is kind of like the conversation you would have when you are like, we're going to play Apocalypse World. And I play Apocalypse World like a rated R movie. But if anybody has a problem with that, let's talk about that now. I feel like that's okay. I think that's okay to bring to the table to say these things and to refine it as you play. I mean, you don't want to sit down and be like, all right, here's 20 minutes of me telling you exactly how you're going to have to behave. But like, here's some things that you're going to get the best fun out of me if we play like this. Does anybody else have stuff like that? Right. And this opens up the table to like kind of break the ice a little bit and let people introduce their own stuff. Right. To say like, you're put in this position where you may not get a chance to decide whether you want to play with someone or not. Obviously, you can bail out at any time. If somebody's like,
Right.
I really
Of
like my
course.
games to be full of racist rhetoric, you could be like, I'm
I
gonna
was like,
go.
okay,
Yeah.
I really enjoy the game as well, where you are no longer in the building.
Right. You're allowed to say no and to back out. It doesn't matter if you're the GM or a player or whatever. You never have to play a game you don't like with people who are terrible. But I think it's okay to not set up as rules, right? Not lean into like I'm the GM and I get to make these calls, but to be like I'm a person playing a game with
Yeah, that
people
makes sense.
and just like set it up, be like, hi, I'm Dave. Today I'm gonna be the dungeon master, and when I dungeon master, here's some stuff that I'm gonna do, and I hope that you will find that fun. Um,
Yes.
and I think if you phrase them as personal preferences, then people can't really argue with you, or if they argue with you, that's like you can't argue with somebody. Like if I say to you, anime was a mistake, then you can say to me, like, you're wrong. No, that's a wrong statement. But if I'm like, I don't like anime, you can't be like, yes, you do.
Yeah.
Right?
That's, yeah, that's a much better way of kind of conceptualizing it and framing it. And that makes me a little bit more confident in being able to lay down those. And I guess they're not really even table rules, like you
No.
say. It's
Well, and
it's personal stuff.
and this is the harmful thing, right? This is the shitty thing where it's like you have all this weight that Gary put on your shoulders, right? That Gary was like, you're the DM, you have to be perfect. And you get to define what perfect is. That's your right as the DM, and nobody else gets any say in the matter. And it's like, that's not how it works as people. You get to just say, like, these are the things that I like and that I care about in games, and this is what's going to be fun for me, and I hope that sounds like fun for you. But if my fun sounds like anti-fun to you, like, now's the chance. Like, let's talk about it while we're all sitting down and getting our stuff and getting ready to play.
Yeah. My worst fear, and it's not actually a fear, I'll preface it by saying it's not, this is a joke, is that there's somebody who asks me not to describe cool like finishing moves and stuff on monsters, like, massive like killing gore fests, and I'm just like, no, I'm not into that. I'm just like,
Well, I mean, that kind of artistic expression is a thing, right? Like learning what is fun, and this is the thing that makes these kind of one-shot relationships with your players difficult. I'll be honest about these sort of organized play things, because I've been a part of them before. I've gone to like sort of story games meetups and stuff. I don't go because I like them in and of themselves. I go to find people that I can be like, so that was fun, but can we ditch these losers and let's all hang out over here for like weekly without them. I go to build my own group. That tends to be my style. So I'm there to like play test people essentially. So I'm looking at every session as like, do I want to play with this person again? Do I want to game marry them? Do I want to have game babies with this person? Is this going to be an all long-term relationship here? Sure. I like, that's my reasons for doing those things. But I think you can still have fun. There are lots of people who are much less about building those longer relationships. So they're just like, I just go every week to play with different people, and I don't care if I ever play the same person twice. So what are you thinking? Like, where do you land on that spectrum? Like, why? I guess the real question is like, why are you doing this? I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, but talk about your motivation, because I think that's important.
Yeah, it's a couple of reasons why I think this is a good fit as an activity. Getting more comfortable with the idea of like spending time with people who I don't know is a thing for me.
Yeah.
Getting over like, I have an end goal of I want to be better at being able to run my own stuff, being more confident about my own ideas. And as kind of off topic as it is, it's a nice thing for someone who's like me, who has their like, my bed's there, my desk's here, I do streaming stuff but spend most of my time in one room, getting out and making sure that there's like personal connections but still doing things that I care about and I'm invested in.
So very much same. Like, yeah. I mean, I'm in exactly the same position. I think a lot of people are. And these are great ways to get out and to engage with people in what to me feels like pretty safe environments. Like, it depends on the store and the people that are there. Obviously, you want to pick that, and you'll learn quickly, if that's a place that feels safe. But I mean, generally, like, tabletop RPGs to me feel like the most comfortable, easiest social interaction I can imagine, because you get to agree from the get-go. There is a limited amount of time you'll be interacting with someone, so it feels safe that way, where you're like, even if this feels like weird, I only have to do it for 2 hours or whatever. You don't have to necessarily interact with the person except through this thing you're making together. And that's a very bonding experience, that like, we're all telling a story about adventure and excitement, and we all have rules that we can follow to tell that story together. So I think above and beyond all the GM stuff, above and beyond all of the actual playing of the game, the social aspects of it are like really beneficial. I think that it can be really nice, because there is that low stakes thing, where you can kind of just pop in and you can play the game, And worst case scenario, you just don't play with those people again. But it can also help build your skills for a longer thing.
Yeah, I hope so. I think, yeah, we've nailed all of those kind of main reasons and why it makes sense to do this as a particular grouping of all those things together.
Yeah.
Because
So do you envision this leading to like a longer term thing, like where you will have like a group you're playing with on the longer end, or is that not really like in mind for right now?
um, I'm not, yeah, not in mind for right now. What I would eventually like to do is um, be able to confidently run stuff, and as I make more 5e content, being able to maybe do campaigns where people are playing as like the new class or whatever, getting some playtests that way, maybe streaming it as some content. But like, I don't know really.
Sure,
For
it's
now,
just like step one.
yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think even if you're not actively playtesting material, right? Even if you're not like someone at the table, I would like it if they played this class I'm working on, because that's a whole other thing. Like if
Mhm.
you're a GM, whether you're doing this like casually at cons or whatever, don't spring a playtest on people. We've talked about this before. Playtesting and playing games are like they look the same, but they're two very different things. And don't do that. But
Um,
I think I mean I don't think you will, but just for everybody else who isn't as smart as you are, don't accidentally make someone playtest. What I think you can do though is get a better understanding of a game by playing it with a bunch of different people, right? Like
yes.
even if you are not actively trying to test like this is a monster, I'm going to use it on every group and see what happens, and you really don't have the freedom to do that because it's Adventures League and it's quite like locked down. You can get a better understanding of 5th edition D&D simply by playing with a bunch of people with different player styles, being able to say, cool, I have never played with these 4 people. And in this way, Adventures League will absolutely serve you as a designer because you're going to see people try to do things with D&D that you would never have thought of. You're going to see people misinterpret rules in ways you would never have imagined possible. Things that are clear and obvious to you and seemingly everyone else on Earth, someone will get wrong. Someone will be like, oh, obviously this means I can attack 4 times in a round. And you're like, how did you get there?
Mhm, mhm.
Um, so I think
Yeah,
that's
I'm
really
expecting.
good. Yeah.
I'm expecting a faster style of play with people who are more focused on their character sheet as stat sheet. I
Yeah.
think it's something that, from what I've talked to people about, um, we're looking at varying degrees of success at like power gaming or trying to have effective characters as opposed to interesting ones,
Yeah.
maybe.
I think yeah, and I think that'll be something interesting to kind of report back on. Something I'm curious about your experience there because in any organized play experience I've had, so I played some of Wizards before the Adventurers League. What do they call it? Dungeon delves. They do these things at PAX where you could actually earn points. Like you'd play the adventure. If you beat the adventure, everyone at the table got a certain number of points. Just for playing, you got some more points, and then you could cash those points in at the merch table for like minis and cards and like basically cool D&D shit. Yeah, it was really fun. We used to do it at PAX all the time, and me and my friends, we would roll up on a dungeon delve and be like, yo, we got an hour, let's fuck the shit out of this dungeon. And we were like, no, stop role playing, kill shit. And we were like, we wouldn't play with other people who were not part of our group because we would ruin their fun if we did, right?
Sure.
Because we all knew our job, right? I was like, I know all the cleric rules, and Tyson knows all the fighter rules, and Emily knows all the rogue rules, and we are going to sit down and we are going to like just rip this dungeon apart as fast and as hard as we can so that we can get them points, right? And
Yeah.
that was our style of play, and that's a very old school D&D. Like that's an OSR kind of approach you can take because it's very pawn stance, right? It's very like our characters don't matter. I built this character as an implement to defeat all that which stands in my way,
Mm.
and I'm gonna kill it. But I don't think that those games really, I don't think they exist anymore. And there were definitely times where we would have to say to the dungeon master like, shush, stop being so flowery. Just tell me if the orc hits me or not. I don't care about my I have burned my immersion in the fires that forged me as a weapon of destruction. And so like that was the thing we would have to tell our DMs. But I think now, like Adventurers League especially, is designed for this much like a mushier version of D&D that is meant to incorporate all kinds of players, right? To be like, some people will be like this and some people will not, and you as the GM have to try to accommodate all of them. So
Right.
what's your thought on that? Like, is that something you want to expressly talk about? Because some players don't realize that they're like that. Some players are like, I love RP, and they're like, nope, I'm here to min max and destroy, but they don't realize.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like pretty happy with either. I've never had a group who's been on the more mechanical side. Like as a group, I've had players who've been super into that and trying to gel that with other people who are happy to do a no dice rolling for a session, which like I'm not super into.
Yeah.
I need to roll dice playing D&D. But maybe the one thing that I'm most confident about in 5e is I could definitely handle it. I'm very, very good at on-the-fly balancing encounters and providing challenges to the group. So there are little bits in the text that talk about sometimes scaling an encounter based on how effective or how powerful a group is. And there's like a little table on the DM like advice PDF for gauging how effective a group is compared to like the level of the content or whatever. But it's not always there. But that's something I'm going to be able to manage. Like if it says 2 skeletons and there's 6 people, I'm just going to be like, okay, that's not
right. And you'd be like, there's no point. There's no point to doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can RP for a while. I'm not great at NPCs, but the fact that this will be a kind of pre-made thing, it will give me an idea of what the people are like. I think I can probably act better than I can improvise those parts. And if people want to take a really long time describing a room, I'm fairly confident, or they would like me to spend time describing the room or describing the effects in combat as opposed to the outcomes. I'm pretty happy with that. So that's why I kind of feel like it's a good fit. It's going to still give me an opportunity to impart some of my own like creativity into it in the ways that I'm most comfortable with.
I actually really like pre-gen adventures for that, because if you were creating a room wholesale from nothing, you have nothing that you are looking at to draw from, it can feel freeing because everything you say is true, right? So if I'm like, there's a table in this room and 2 chairs, nobody is telling me, oops, Adam, there's actually 4 chairs, and that's important to a puzzle later. You need all 4 chairs, Adam, right? Because I'm just making it up as I go. But it can also, you're not beheld to anything. You can just make it up, and so there's no worry you will ever make a mistake because whatever you say becomes real. But I like pre-gen adventures because it forces you to find interesting ways to describe stuff beyond the box text. And box text has had an interesting relationship with Dungeons & Dragons for its entire existence. It used to be that they were like they were long. They were like pages. It would be like, all right, everybody, sit down as I tell you the story of, and it would take a long time to explain all of this stuff, or there would be homework the players would have to do. Now, it's basically just like, here's the most basic stuff. Here's just like what is important, but it doesn't always end up covering everything. And so you do also have to have this understanding of like what's in the room, what is important, how do I impart that, and how do I answer questions? Because there's the non-pre-gen, make it up as you go, you've built it yourself thing where you can change your prep. So if a player says like, is there a fork on the table? You can be like, yeah, that seems like reasonable, but it may be very important in a pre-gen adventure that there are no forks on the table. So you do have to have a really good understanding of not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of it. Like, why is this description written this way? Why are these things in this room? And people will tell you like, read the whole adventure, over and over and over, read the whole adventure. And with Adventurers League, that might be possible. And I think with Adventurers League, that's sort of, you do need to read the whole adventure at least once and then focus on the rooms that seem the most complicated. But with a larger pre-gen adventure, there's chunks of the end of Tomb I haven't read because I don't have time to read the whole thing. I just read what I anticipate that you as players will get into in the next session. And if that leads me to other stuff, so if it's like, there's an NPC here and they know the big secrets about Ross and C, I'm like, okay, I better go and learn what those secrets are. But yeah, the players in Adventurers League game, because their goal is just to experience the adventure and not to like violate it horribly with weapons and spells so as to get through it fast enough that maybe they can jump in on another table that died.
Right.
Their goal is just to play the thing. You do have a little bit more breathing room, right? Like our Adventurers League games took forever because we spent so much time goofing off and like just engaging with scenes, and like that was our goal.
Yeah.
Prep is the thing, right? And how much of it you want to do.
Yeah, the fact that the module I'm looking at has a bunch of puzzles in it, and my previous experience of doing puzzles was, and this was great for the non-prep heavy make it up as I go along, as I normally do, is like you say, if people notice something and they latch onto it, then you can just be like, yes, actually, that's the puzzle, not this other contrived shit that I was kind of coming up with.
Right.
But for this, making sure not to obfuscate the essential elements of X puzzle is going to be a big thing, and just like a learning experience, I guess. Spending the correct amount of words on that as a
puzzles are, I hate them. I don't hate them in games, but when I think about them, like in the moment they can be fun, but when I think about them and when people ask me about them, I'm like, oh God, puzzles. Because I think let's talk about puzzles for a minute, because I think they can be great, and I think that you have some feelings about them generally. But I think that let's imagine an excitement spectrum of puzzles, right? And here's before you know anything about the puzzle, and here's where you solve the puzzle. There's a tiny, tiny, narrow window in there somewhere where the puzzles are fun. Everything else is not fun, because you have this like lead up to the fun where you're like, okay, so I'm learning all the pieces. So there's a blue tile and a yellow tile. There's a green tile and a red tile. They're arranged in a certain way. Okay, I'm getting all the pieces together. I'm picking up all my stuff. Great, right? Then there's the part where you're working on the puzzle. That's the fun, where you're like, okay, everybody, let's work together to figure this stuff out. Let's figure this out, and we're gonna try to decide what the puzzle solution is, and that's fun. That's the fun bit. Sure. And then it's horrible after that, because you always hit a wall where you're like, wait, I don't know what the solution is to this, and now we're just randomly guessing and trying stuff and being punished for randomly guessing. Yep,
having the fun section, and then go like, okay, we try this thing, and like, I'm afraid that doesn't, or you take a bunch of damage, and then you're just like, why couldn't you have just said yes? I mean, fuck the rest. We're all just going to start feeling bad and stupid now.
The death spiral on a puzzle in a role-playing game is so high, because, and it always happens in the same way, right? You start building the clues as a person. Your character, you separate from your character, and you and your friends are doing the team building exercise, and you're like, okay, all right, guys, we got it together. Let's figure it out. And then you fuck it up, and then you're like, well, okay, let's start bargaining with the GM. Well, like, my character is smart. Can I make a perception roll? Can I have some clues? Can you give me some hints? And the GM's sitting there like, oh, God, it's so obvious because I have the answers and you don't. It's so obvious to me. Why can't you figure this out? And then you get to a place where either you get so frustrated you don't want to do it anymore and you leave, or the GM takes pity on you and is like, well, Orvex is like, perhaps you should press the red button, Widdershins. And you're like, you ruined it. Why'd you tell me? This is like chat spoiling a puzzle in a video game. There's no good way out. Like, once you reach that threshold of like, I can't figure this out and I feel stupid, it stops being fun, and then now you're just trying to work your way back up out of a negative fun hole, and it's not good. It's not a good time.
Yeah. And all I guess I can do is be prepared for that to happen with this and offer them like the way I would want this to be handled if it was me and if I was clearly getting frustrated is for the GM to say, okay, you're clearly bored of this now. Let's just
I wonder about that. And like outside all the context, should we as players, should we have a like a puzzle safe word? Should we have like a ripcord we can all just pull? Like if the whole group unanimously decides fuck this puzzle, should we be punished for giving up, or should we be given mercy? Like, because I mean, a puzzle is there. You don't get XP for solving puzzles in D&D unless the adventure specifically says if they figure this out, give them this stuff. All you get is the reward on the other side, either continuing from the adventure, or you get treasure. You get a magic jar that shoots mayonnaise out of it. Should you be denied the magic jar of mayonnaise if you give up on the puzzle? I want to say yes, but also I feel like puzzles are mean.
Yeah, it is the kind of thing with Adventurers League as well, where it's out of your hands. You don't get to decide whether it's a progression integral puzzle room or whether it's like a.
And this is the pre-gen adventure, yeah. And we're gonna run across this in Tomb. Like there are absolutely puzzles that if you cannot or do not solve them, you cannot continue in the adventure. This is the like Zork shit where you're like, I don't know, use sword on self.
Yes,
where you hit that wall, and there's nothing. The adventure is written such that I don't want to hack the adventure so deeply to give you a way out, but also we're gonna end up sitting there and be like, okay, you gotta figure it out.
Yeah, it's puzzles are definitely the hard thing, and I don't know. I generally feel like I don't like them being included at all.
Yeah, that's my feeling, right? Because if you do have that safe word, why have the puzzle at all, right? If you're like, we're all bored of this is boring and dumb, can we not do this and do something different? Why? Like, it just shows like this is like if you're losing how is this like losing a combat, right? Like if you're in combat and you're like, wait, we have to beat this monster to proceed, but we're losing. Can we just not fight him?
Yeah. I guess on some levels, you're right. It is very similar. But on others, I want to make that distinction of puzzles generally, unless they have like a magical component that requires you to have like a wizard to cast a certain spell, are not actually part of the game.
Yes, there you go. So yes, that was absolutely me just baiting you into the answer I knew you already had. Puzzles are not a part of Dungeons and Dragons.
No.
They're not. You can make up mechanisms for the players to interact with, but puzzles almost never have character interaction.
No, it would be really interesting to see a puzzle written such that it had like all the mechanisms written down, what you're supposed to tell people, what's in the room, but to call out specifically, like, if a character has passive perception X, mention this.
Yes.
If they make an Arcana skill, realize the nature of the puzzle is Y. I think that would be an interesting way of writing it.
There's an old RPG. There's an old RPG that did this with lore. So it was called Weapons of the Gods. The game changed names between sessions. It used to be based on manhwa, and then they stripped it of its IP, and it became something else. And I can't remember the two names, but it had lore pages, and it was like, if your character has this level of lore in this thing, they can read, Legends of Wulin, that's what it was called. Yeah, they could read the first 3 entries on this page. If you don't have 20 in lore, do not read past this point. Your character does not know this. You could absolutely, and I'm sure someone must have made an adventure that was like this, that was like, when they get here, roll a perception check. If they get a 20, tell them these things, et cetera, et cetera. But I feel like the frustrating thing about that is, what do you do when you walk in and you blow your perception check and you're like, great. Now there's stuff that we should have gotten, but we didn't because we rolled bad and we're too dumb to, like, it feels like it exacerbates some of the problems.
Yeah, like there's this hole and you're trying to do all the things with it, but you didn't roll high enough on the perception to find the lever underneath the rug. So all these awesome ideas that you're having like got fucked over because of a roll, and it's not even necessarily that you're thinking about it wrong. And
yeah, my thought is gradiated perception or knowledge or any kind of roll is really fun. I like gradiated success. D&D is much too binary in that way. And I think that's definitely a thing. I think you can talk to your players about puzzle hints. I tend specifically to hate giving hints. I hate it. Like, it feels like I'm disservicing all of us. It's like when a player rolls an attack roll, it feels like it's cheating, because it's like you're giving the players something that they didn't earn and you're taking away their ability to earn things. I would rather that you felt frustrated and gave up, but I also believe in multiple paths to success. This is why, Janelle Jaquay's dungeons are so brilliant, because it's like you're in an area. There are a dozen ways to traverse this area, some more challenging than others, whatever. Some of them might be blocked by puzzles, others might not, right?
Yeah.
That's important. If you're playing an adventure and there is a puzzle that blocks the way forward, recognize that your session might come to a grinding halt when you get there, right? That might just be the end of it.
Yeah. And like you say, there are going to be some people who write the modules or come up with adventures that have this in mind, and others who just think, I came up with a really cool puzzle, I want everyone to interact with it, and fuck anyone who's too stupid to
right. And it's harsh, right? It's like,
it is difficult.
It's really harsh because I think the thing is we can all blame. There's a degree to which we feel good or bad about puzzle stuff or anything in a game, where like if the character screws up, right? If you roll bad, it's bad luck. You can be like, well, it's not my fault. Like there's no roll skill. There's no good way to roll. There are tactical choices that you can mismake and be like, okay, well, whatever, we can get over that. But it's very, very hard to not feel like you're a fuck up if you can't figure out a D&D puzzle.
Yes,
right.
I agree. That's my main. That's when I come into them conceptually. That's the first thing that comes into my head. It's like, I know I want to be a smart person, and these do not ever end up making me feel smart, even if I get them, because then I feel like they're too easy because someone expected me to get them.
Yeah, well, and they're really hard to balance too, because like we talked about before, because Tomb has had a few of these. I've put riddles in games, but there's always a chance that unless you make the riddle up yourself, which is very hard to do, someone will just be like, I know this, done, I did it, I got it, I knew this one. It doesn't matter what my character means, I know it. So I think multiple pathways to success if you're building your own thing, but also if you're not, maybe mention it to your group. Right? Like it doesn't have to be a big thing, but I think it's fair to say, like after we did the whole crocodile thing in Tomb, I was like, there's more of this. Like there's more of this bullshit, and it will happen. So get ready. If anybody is like wants to tap out right now, we can talk about coming to a new solution. But we all were like, okay, fine, we'll tough through it and we'll do the dungeon as it's written. But you can have that conversation with your players. You can sit down and be like, all right, so there's a puzzle in this that your characters can't affect, and it's going to rely on you to solve. How does everybody feel about that? And if anybody's like, you know what, I really, really hate puzzles in games, that's going to ruin my fun, I'm going to play up to that point, but then I'm going to kind of just like, I'm going to opt out. Maybe I'm going to leave, or maybe I'm just going to like, I'll go get a drink while you do the puzzle, and I'm going to kind of back out. Or maybe they'll just be like, I don't want to be a part of this. And that's okay, right? Like it can be very frustrating as a form of content. And it's not part of D&D. Someone signing up for Dungeons & Dragons should not be assumed to have already consented to being stuck in a frustrating puzzle situation.
Yeah.
It's a thing. So it's tricky because it's like you get into these situations that are player based. They're not game based. And so like we were talking about before, I think that in a situation like this where you're playing with new people, you can just sit down and you can talk to them and you can say like, there's no way through. how do we want to do this? Is everybody willing to buy in to puzzle adventure? Because I honestly think even if I hate puzzles, I'd still buy in, because it's only like a 2-hour session, and even if I hate the puzzle so much, we can all laugh afterwards and be like, man, that puzzle was bullshit, right? Yeah, and I think that's fine. But you as a GM, I don't think, without violating the spirit of the adventure, I don't think you can do anything about that.
No, and thankfully the module that I'm reading, it's more, if you don't notice this thing, you're going to take like a level of exhaustion or 2d8 damage. It's not going to be okay.
So you can tweak. Yeah, you can absolutely tweak the puzzle, because almost, I would say most of the puzzles that I know, there's a punishment for guessing wrong, right?
Sure.
Which is supposed to be like putting some tension on it, right? So you're not like, we press every button. But I think if you read the puzzle and you understand it, there are ways to tweak that, right? To say like, okay, this makes the puzzle extra frustrating, so I'm going to pull that out. The enraged timer doesn't have to be there in the puzzle. But yeah, it's a thing. Like, I think this is really more, we're getting more into design, like how to design stuff that's better than that. But I think part of playing with a pre-gen adventure, you have to be a designer, and it teaches you to be a better designer, because you're going to understand what you like about dungeons, what you like about pre-gen stuff. I've modified Tomb of Annihilation to be more fun for me and for my group, but only in fairly subtle ways, because I think it's quite a good adventure. I think it applies to a bunch of different styles. It's not too much one thing or another. But since you're playing with strangers, you don't really have that ability. And because Adventures League, you can't really be like, I didn't like this encounter, so I changed it. I think it's actually kind of a fascinating experience, because you're so beholden to what's already in front of you.
Yeah, and it kind of takes a little bit of or you would hope it takes a little bit of the pressure off you. It's like, if people are frustrated with something, you can kind of be like, me too.
I'm frustrated for you. Yeah, like, it's not my fault. But like, disclaiming that responsibility for the adventure is not going to make anybody happy. No. You can commiserate, but ultimately you know the answer and they don't, and they're going to resent you for it, even just like a little bit.
I suppose.
Because you're withholding. But like, I mean, it's got to be about like recognizing it. Like, I've never been in a situation where something happened in a game that was frustrating for everybody that we didn't all laugh about later. Like, boy, that was bad. That was a bad experience. I think it gets interesting when we start to apply, like, we expect puzzles in Dungeons and Dragons, right? We expect them because they're just a thing that's been around in D&D forever, because Tolkien, put a puzzle in front of Moria. But I think it's interesting when we look at puzzles in a more abstract sense, like NPCs that don't do what you want unless you have a specific piece of information, right? Social interaction is a bit like a puzzle too, because you do have the persuade check, but it doesn't. It's not very well adjudicated in the book.
Yeah, you could have ended that sentence at social interactions are a puzzle, and I would have just agreed with you in general. But right. Yeah, specifically
in Dungeons and Dragons, they can be as well. The withholding NPC that if you don't tell them the specific thing or whatever, those are the NPCs that get stabbed. Those NPCs get stabbed like real quick.
Yes. That's fine.
Yeah,
I'm happy with that.
Yeah,
I would stab an NPC.
And I think Adventures League cares less about that, because puzzles don't have hit points, but NPCs that talk back, well, they have hit points, and you can take them away from them.
Yeah,
which is a reasonable way to play by the rules of the game. But I feel like hopefully you're not going to run into too many situations where the whole adventure hinges on a binary success fail in a puzzle situation. Hopefully those adventures did not make it past QA.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about them having QA.
Yeah.
Hopefully those get picked up. And if not, then it's a bonding experience of hating it, and we'll see where the fault lies.
Yeah, you can all laugh and say, well, the rest of the adventure was fun, hopefully. Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about puzzles, we mean specifically like game mechanic exempt, one solution, Indiana Jones style, like do the right thing or either die or stop progress. We're not talking about combat as puzzle. Like everything in Dungeons and Dragons is problem solving, but we're talking specifically about there is no mechanical way to interact with most puzzles based on your class abilities and your stats in the game. Sometimes there are athletics checks to be made in addition, but mostly when we talk about puzzles in D&D, we're talking about use your human brain to through your character solve this logic puzzle or whatever.
And I'm sure we all are much happier with the idea of combat being a thing that you kind of can puzzle out and to a certain extent make the optimal moves in.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's, as we said, the buy-in and the conceit of the entire experience.
Yeah, that's Dungeons and Dragons, is solving the problem of combat in the sense of like, yeah, each turn making the correct move. Which brings me back kind of to a point that you and I kind of have talked about in Tomb and in other D&D games. Like, what do you do when the difficulty of an encounter is predicated on the players not having certain knowledge?
That's
like the difference between we spend the first 3 rounds figuring out what the creature is weak to or strong to versus I've read the monster manual, I already know, I hit him with all my lightning spells and so does everybody else. Like what does that look like from a GM perspective for you?
Generally this is when you have a much easier time if you're playing kind of off the books and creating your own stuff.
Mm-hmm. Because you can be like, it's a froghemoth, except I've changed some of its like weaknesses around.
Right. Yeah, and from what I have seen of the published stuff, and admittedly that's not very much, and watching other people play, I think generally the mistake that is made is things are statted or based on CR in such a way that assumes that knowledge to a certain extent of the weakness of a creature. Like, if we had to fight a froghemoth with the thunder damage or the lightning damage on it always, it doesn't have the multi-attack, it can't do a bunch of the shit. And that's fine, but it should be not an expected to succeed encounter, right, as it was. I've personally always enjoyed much more having a creature that seems insurmountable, but giving people time to work around and spend time doing like side quests or using resources in one way or another to earn that knowledge, to make that something that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do into manageable because they've done it. It's like,
right,
like there is a dragon around here, guys, and you're only level 5, but you do need to deal with it.
Well, and I think, I mean, again, I think that plays into the fiction that D&D is inherently based on too. That idea of like, hi, I'm Bard, and I'm gonna kill Smog with a single shot because I'm the best archer, and you know, like that idea of monsters being more than their things, and I think informing the characters is easy, right? Like you find graffiti on the wall that's like, strike not the toad with beams or whatever, you know, like there are ways to teach the characters this stuff. But if you're using bog standard monster manual stat blocks, you're going to have players whose characters don't know as much about those monsters as possible. And then you put those players in that awkward position of having to play suboptimally.
Yeah, it feels bad.
It does feel bad. Yeah.
Yeah, and as with most things with the game, it's a balance. Being able to correctly identify how troubling something is with the knowledge of how to beat it and without the knowledge. Like zombies are always going to be easy. Well, actually, no, that's a slightly bad example. Skeletons are always going to be a certain difficulty.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter what you do to them, they die in the same way. Zombies, even though like only marginally more difficult, are considerably easier when you have the knowledge about radiant damage or crits or whatever and how their fortitude works.
Yeah.
Piling in a big attack instead of smaller ones. And having, like, almost having a blind CR and a tactics CR
Right.
is the thing you kind
I
of want
mean,
to have to bear in mind as a GM.
I think we've talked about this, and it's my personal opinion is that CR is barely useful for
No,
managing because the
it's
groups,
very much
like you
not.
said, a group of experienced players building their characters well in the sense that they're built for the kinds of encounters they're encountering with all their shit charged up. That is much easier than like this is your fourth encounter of the day. You've never played D&D before. Like it's completely different, and so you can't use the math for this. So I think that it's one of these things where we kind of just have to, like you said, like adapt on the fly and not be beholden to the idea that an encounter should feel like anything. Like it just is what it is, and it's you get through it or you don't, and it's hard or it's easy.
Yep.
And you let that be a surprise.
Yeah, I think that holds true most of the time, and the exception, as I was trying to explain, is where you have set something up as a set piece, and it's far enough away from being a random encounter that you can expect it to be like more difficult or requiring some sort of prep.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, again, we go back to this idea that if you're running a pre-gen adventure, you may kind of have your hands tied
Yes.
around what the game says, and you are only really given the tools that it gives you. So I think the biggest advice here, and the thing that I would say, like you have an allowance not to take it too seriously, because you
Sure.
can foist off any problematic, like if you get into an encounter and they wipe the floor with it, and later they're like, well, that was too easy. You can shrug and be like, well, I mean, it was the hardest that encounter could possibly be. That's just a thing. If it's really hard, again, you can be like, right, it was really hard. Like
Yeah,
that's
sorry, you didn't have a paladin to kill that
yeah,
boss.
that's kind of, and you can have those little game design conversations, and we've
Yeah.
done that before in our group where we've been like, that's how it's written. It's weird, right? Um,
Yep.
yeah, and so it's like, we can have these conversations and we can talk to our players about it. And because you're only playing these one little thing, one-offs, you're getting the benefits of play from other things in the game. So it's just like a thing that you can experience, and it's very easy to kind of like let go. If somebody's real salty about it, it doesn't matter. You'll play a different adventure another time.
Yes.
So I think
Yeah,
that
that should be.
I think this kind of organized play is actually really useful for that kind of like learning as an experience. And you may find players that you really like, you want to play with again, and or you may really enjoy just doing the kind of chained one shots. Um,
Yeah.
do you have a
Yeah.
start date? Do you know when you're doing your first one?
Well, that actually depends on a conversation we're currently having
Mm.
somewhere else. Um,
Mm-hmm.
about whether we're going to reschedule a session. But
Right.
once we know that, it will be one of the coming Mondays, I guess. And yeah, it's gonna be great. And I think having talked it through with you, I've got a little bit more of an idea nailed down of both what I'm expecting, some places where there is just like nebulous anxiety feelings that don't make a
Right.
huge amount of sense, and yeah, the difference between what I'm expecting to get out of it as opposed to learning more about the game and learning about the way that the game is being played is going to be a big thing, and negotiating that socially and learning to be better at putting across your own kind of like boundaries and
Yeah, well, and the conversation is interesting because I feel like what your main stuff is like just interacting with strangers. Like you have no. It doesn't sound to me like you have any anxiety about like running D&D.
yeah, it was only those very few like kind of specific questions like about puzzles. What you tended to in explanations cover things that I've got written down, like what do you do if X, Y, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we've already gone over that. I'm fairly confident that I know a lot about playing D&D. I know kind of how it works on a fundamental level, but working out how people engage with it is something
And that's
I'm not
yeah.
sure.
And that's it's funny because that I feel like that's often the opposite where we assume that we just know how to socialize with other people, and we feel anxiety around the role-playing game part, or like, what if I don't know the rules? What if someone expects me to do a thing? What if people disagree with me? But it can absolutely be the other way around, where you're like, I understand this game, but what if people don't play it the way I do?
Yeah, I mean, say that exact same sentence, but make the object of the sentence the social interaction.
Right.
What are the rules of this? What if people disagree with me on how to play? And
Right,
that's
exactly.
where I'm coming
And
from.
like with giving people advice around playing role playing games, I think that remember, like, everyone's fun is their own responsibility.
Yes.
Communicating the things that you want and need in games is a good way to be responsible for your own fun. You don't have to play with people who are jerks, and you can talk about your experiences with people both before, during, and after the game. And that's something
Yeah.
that I think is really important, because yeah, like, playing role playing games and having some degree of social anxiety is absolutely a thing. It's completely real, and it's important to reinforce people around that too. So I think, I
Yeah.
mean, like I said, go in, do the thing. You know how to play D&D. The rest of it, you will learn through playing. And when it comes down to it, it's very low stakes. So if it's real bad, it
Yes.
doesn't. It's not. You didn't start a campaign that turned out bad. It was just one session, and you can come back and play with different people. And that's. I feel like that's freeing, right, in a way.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what I'll add to that actually, and maybe this only counts for me, but for other people in the same situation, one of the big driving factors to get me to do this and made me okay with the idea of GMing instead of having to play first is they've started gamifying the GMing experience in as much as you have quests to do as a GM in Adventurers League and organized play now. So even if you have a bad time, you still actually earned XP for being like a person and going out and socializing in a really weird way.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes it a little bit more palatable. And I just thought I'd mention that in case, like I say, in case there are other people thinking about it. Or
Well, yeah. So if that's something that people are interested in, just do a search for Adventures League. You probably have a friendly local game store somewhere near
probably,
you where you can get involved and you can play. And yeah, it's a good way to, like, dip your toe in, right? It may not be reflective of your entire D&D experience, but it's a good way to just get out there for a couple hours and hang out and pretend to be an elf and see
yeah,
what you think. And you might meet some other people that you can form a group with if that's something you're trying to do IRL. So cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Dave, and for talking about your upcoming GM experience. It's been fun. I love talking about D&D with you.
yeah, me
And I
too.
think I think you have some good insights into it. So thanks for coming and sharing those with people.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for giving me the time to do so.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Let me know how it goes. I'm excited to hear more. For everybody watching at home, thanks for coming. This has been an episode of Office Hours. I've been blessed with a dearth of exciting guests lately. I was joking. I just need to get Distracted Elf on the show now, and I'll have my whole D&D group on the show. Maybe I'll ask Elf to come on and talk about LARPing and how LARPing can make you a better game master. That'd be a good show. We'll return next time to the question and answer format. So if you have questions, go to www.adam-koble.com. Click on the Office Hours link, and you can ask me your questions there. I got tons of good ones, so we'll pick up those again next week, and we'll return with that. So thanks for watching, everybody. This has been episode number 68 of Office Hours. Thank you, Dave, for coming. Follow Dave on Twitter, Dave the Human. Dave, you're still working on your Summoner class, right?
Sure am. Yeah, that's going to be streamed on Fridays at 5 p.m. GMT before we do Team of Annihilation.
Excellent. Cool. So Friday, check out Dave's stuff. We will see all of you next time for more Office Hours. Thanks for coming, everybody. Bye.